Yeah, so tell us about these results. I mean, you basically were able to use the body's natural abilities to sense things to have instead of a medical implant, you can use the organs function, right, to find glucose levels and all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah. So this year we presented two main findings. One is that by tapping into the information transfer between our peripheral organs and our brain, we managed to pick up signals that relate to changes in the homeostasis. So in one sense, it was related to the immune response, and we managed to pick up signals from the main conduit of this signaling back and forth between the brain and the organs, which is the vagus nerve. And we deciphered these signals, and we managed to identify states of inflammation when it comes to specific cytokines. So cytokines are mediators of inflammation. We managed to identify cytokine-specific signaling, which was, as far as we know, the first time that anyone has ever found such signals. And the second poster was about finding correlations between neural signals and glucose levels. And the main idea behind both of these posters is that we're picking up sensory signals that are sent to the brain from various receptors in the body that sense the changes in the levels of cytokines in one sense, or the changes in the blood glucose level in the other case. And that signaling, we hope in the future we can start using to build devices that are implantable, that are going to read from the signals and decipher them using all the different methods that we're developing and we will be developing, and diagnose diseases before they even emerge and their symptoms emerge.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with the glucose stuff. So you're able to measure the glucose levels within the body. Was it pretty accurate, and what kind of time resolution were you able to get? And I mean, if you had to compare it to a glucose meter that people get, is it comparable to this?
So all this, it's worth noting that all this is preclinical data, right? So these are experiments that have been done mainly in mice
under very specific conditions.
So the mice are anesthetized, yes, and that's a key component of all these different things that we're talking about, because one of the main aspects of the vagus nerve is that it carries information about a lot of different things. So if you want to really focus and hone in on one specific one, for instance, the information related to changes in blood glucose levels, you either need to be very, very lucky, or you need to sample for all this activity, but really try to manage to pull out the relevant information. And you do that both by using what we call this signal processing machine learning framework, but also by experimental manipulation. So by putting the animal, by fasting the animal, so you get rid of most of the gastric-related signals, by putting it under anesthesia so that you don't have any movements, any signals that would interrupt or intervene with the signals that you're looking for. And then by challenging the system, in our case, when it comes to the metabolic studies with glucose or insulin. So you actually cause a very drastic change in the blood glucose level by either raising it or dropping it. And you see how these sensors pick up that change and relate back to the brain. So you really probe the system to listen to it and see how it responds. The same with the immune studies. We had to inject cytokines intraperitoneally, so we injected a certain concentration in the animal and saw how the vagus nerve responded to that. I mean, the future again is to pick up those signals in vivo. I mean, they are in vivo animals, but freely behaving in chronic conditions, and that's something that we're working towards. But I mean, this is the first kind of like proof of concept, and it's also the results have been very, very promising. So we're really looking forward to working, in the next steps.
Yeah, exactly. So it'd be like almost like a nylon rope or something like this, right? There's millions of strands inside, kind of like this nerve bundle, and you have to find the one that's working. So what you do is basically shut off everything else, and then listen for any activity after you inject the cytokines or the glucose or insulin or something like this, and be like, okay, that one has a close response, or that one monitors or follows what we would expect.
Exactly.
And then in the future, we could map out like what each of these strands do, but that's at least a few years in the future.
Yes, they are. It is some years in the future. But at first, we just want to see whether that's even feasible, whether you can pick up these signals, whether they even exist.
How was it? Like was it just kind of a rough signal? I mean, so what I saw, it was quite impressive, like how well it marked, how well it followed the measured insulin levels and measured glucose. Well, I think it was insulin it followed well.
Yes.
And then
glucose,
but
glucose did not. So that's we're trying to figure out why. We have some hypotheses on this, but in general, we saw that we could follow big swings that were caused by insulin injections, so dropping. But for our glucose injections, the error was quite high. It was not comparable to a glucometer. Going back to your question, though, because I think I didn't even answer that, we actually tried to stay within the errors of a standard glucometer of 10%. I think that's FDA, the guidelines for glucometers from the FDA. But in general, the way we measure it was we take blood draws from the animal. So we have the ground truth of the blood glucose level, and then we regress to that using the neural signals that we pick up. So in general, I would say that our errors when it worked were well within, and it tracked quite well. But again, we're talking about very, very drastic changes in the blood glucose. We're talking about healthy animals. So there are ways to go, and there's a lot of things to try out. But at least we're hopeful that we can tease out from all the signaling that's in there the one that's relevant to what we're looking for.
But so definitely laboratory conditions, but proof of concept was excellent, right? Okay, interesting. So now going to these cytokines. So basically these are inflammatory markers, right? And these are specific cytokines. You tested two, which are specific to or generally associated with some kind of inflammatory disease.
So it's they're heavily involved in the inflammatory reflex. And they are related to almost all the autoimmune diseases. I think the choice is mainly to, it could be almost any two cytokines. We chose two that were involved in a lot of autoimmune diseases, and also just to point to the fact that these signals that we pick up are specific to these cytokines, and they're not just a gross response to the inflammation, and that's quite important when we move forward and try to really specify what is the inflammatory state of the animal and the human.
So it could recognize which one it was, and you could be like, could it well, this probably would be. This wasn't really, I guess, tested, but could it recognize also like which organ it was? Like, you're having some inflammation in the left kidney or something like this.
Yeah. No, not yet. The idea is right now the injections are not even organ specific. They're not injecting a specific organ. They're intraperitoneally, so in the whole peritoneum. So in that case, we actually just. I think what we detect is the changes in the cytokine presence in the blood, rather than the bloodstream. The uptake being uptaken by the organs, the various organs, or and released in the bloodstream. So, but in general, what we saw is that we can definitely discriminate between two different cytokines. Now, that's a very good question, and if you really want to be very specific, what we're hoping on doing in the future is making these changes endogenous. So making the actual organ that gets inflamed, or the part of our body that gets inflamed, release these cytokines naturally, and then hopefully we'll be able, by applying very similar methods, to detect the signaling that is involved in endogenous changes in the cytokines rather than just injected cytokines intraperitoneally. And that's really the holy grail of this work, is to detect changes that just happen because there's inflammation going.
That's incredible. Yeah. So it'd be almost like having dozens or hundreds of medical devices implanted in your body, but just by basically wiretapping into your information system, going to the brain. I mean, you can find out like, hey, what's going on, and in a quantitative way as well. It's like, 17% inflammation or something like this, right? Mm-hmm. That's pretty crazy. So, what kind of future do you see? I mean, how do you see this evolving, and maybe what would be needed as well?
That's a great question. There are a lot of things that are needed, but at least we feel confident that right now, at least these signals exist, and we're trying to understand a lot more about the mechanism behind them. But also, while trying to do that, we are developing and we are working very closely with people that are creating better electrodes that tap into the nerve. So that's a big component of our work, and we're also refining the algorithms involved in that. So there's always these parallel paths that we're taking, and my lab has been focused on developing the signal processing and the machine learning framework. So really, starting off from the raw signal and then coming up with a prediction whether the animal is in baseline mode or is injected or exposed to cytokine A or cytokine B. But obviously, as anyone that has done data analysis or any kind of machine learning, the most important part is the actual signals, the data that you get, the quality of the data, and also the amount of data. So we definitely want more data. We want more access to more information, more detailed information from the nerve. So electrodes that will sample from multiple locations of the nerve, inside the nerve if possible, geometries that would enable some kind of source localization, where if you record from around the nerve, whether you can reconstruct sources of signals that are coming from inside the nerve, right? So all these would be great, and we're working towards that, and we're collaborating closely with people that develop these kind of electrodes, but also just advancing the animal model. So right now we're working with mice just to understand the mechanism, but we want to move to larger animal models because the electrodes will have the right form factor that will translate to the humans, and also the signals will look a lot closer in terms of their physiology and their characteristics.
You were talking about that the difference between mice and rat was actually kind of big, and it was kind of problematic too.
Yes. So that's always the challenges of working with real data in animal models and moving from one animal model to the other, and that is related to the differences in anatomy and physiology of the different species. In our case, we've been having a lot of challenges working with the rat, while in the mice it seemed that a lot of these were ironed out even before we started working on this. So it seems that getting signals from the surface of the vagus nerve in the rats is a lot more challenging than getting the same quality of signals from the surface of the vagus nerve in mice. And we think that has everything to do with the anatomy of the nerve. Although you would think that it's a lot more challenging to sample from a nerve that's 100 micrometers small than a 400 micrometers small, so 4 times larger in a rat. The size is not the main issue. The issue is the connective tissue that's around the nerve and inside the nerve too. So as far as I know, the vagus nerve in the mouse does not have very distinct fascicles. It's groups of bundles of nerves that are surrounded by the perineurium, this connective tissue, whereas in the rat that's the case. And usually connective tissue inside the nerve kind of like creates a lot of attenuation in the signals from the fibers, right? So in order to reach the surface, it's harder now than it was with the mice. So it seemed that we were closer to the sources of these signals in the mice, so that's why we were pretty successful in detecting the signal. In the rats, it's definitely more challenging, although we're pretty confident that we're going we're following the right path, because we're starting to get some similar responses, and we're also I think with the rat it's going to be a lot easier to move to chronic conditions and work on that.
And what do you think about moving to like a pig model or human? Or do you think it would be even harder, or would it go back to being easier?
Well, no, I think it's going to be the challenges are changing all the time. So there are a lot of things that are a lot easier. Working with nerves in a pig or a human. I mean, I recently saw the vagus nerve in pigs, and it actually is impressively large, especially when you're used to the mouse or the rat. I mean, it's just the way anatomy is. But that offers a lot more opportunities to try to develop and try different things. I think the main challenge of all these would be to sample adequately in terms of, especially so going inside the nerve. So you can definitely try to do that in animals, but in the humans it's going to be a lot more challenging to prove that this penetration of the nerve will not cause a lot of nerve damage, and also make sure that that whatever damage there is, it's not going to be actually deterrent to the health of the human, and the benefits outweigh the cost of your approach. But yeah, definitely some things are going to be a lot easier in terms of surgically placing these electrodes and making them work chronically. The signal quality is going to be a challenge, as we learned from moving from mouse to rat. So, but that's the process. You just keep on trying, move forward, and learn from the new challenges, and try to get over them.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Very cool. So, what would be the next step?
For us, is again twofold. One is to move to a chronic embodiment of our experiment. So really, right now all our experiments were acute. So now we would like to have on the same animal across days of experiments, injections, every 2 to 3 days, and looking at the response and seeing whether we get the same response or different across days. That would also inform our algorithm development. So our algorithms right now are based on this approach that we're building these algorithms, these methods, these machine learning methods to identify these signals. But obviously, the signaling might change a lot more from across days rather than across hours.
And also, I mean, once you find the nerve, does it have to be anesthetized anymore, or what?
So as soon as the electrodes are placed on the nerve, the animal does not have to be anesthetized anymore if you suture it up and make sure that there's no infection. But the animal can be be awoken and freely moving. Now again, that poses more challenges, and there's a lot of artifacts when the animal starts moving around. So we're thinking of ways of trying to tackle that. So that's another big part of the signal processing that we need to apply. But in general, even if the animal is anesthetized, but we actually see the same signaling across days, or what changes in the signals across days, that would be quite valuable for what we're trying to do. And then just keep on refining our methods and our machine learning methods. I think that's one of the biggest gains that we have from this approach, that we are thinking of the methods that there's no reason why these methods should not be applied even in the final embodiment in humans, because we're talking about neural signals, and the neural coding by itself would change from species to species, but the rules of it won't necessarily change. So you can apply the same machine learning approaches to either of these species.
Oh, very cool. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to mention?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. Right now, that's mainly the main two projects that we're working on. As far as the lab is concerned, I'm happy to work with Todd Levy and Subhas Padmanabhan. So both of them are really capable guys. One is my electrical engineer, the other one is a postdoctoral fellow in the lab. And we're very lucky to work with people in the Center for Bioelectronic Medicine. So all the people that are working on the electrodes, such as Lauren Reith and Harvey Sohal, to doing the actual recordings. Harvey's involved in that, and also my brother, actually, Theodoros Zanos, who's also setting up the pig lab at the center. And then we have Timur working on the bioelectronics. So we are I feel good about the team as well that's working on this, all of these projects. So yeah, we're very excited about the future, and yeah, let's see what we can come up with soon.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm excited as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.